Good evening, everyone. It is so nice to have you here because we are here to celebrate a really special book, which is the launch date of Composite Creatures by Caroline. We also have joining us this evening another incredible author called Carys, who's written this book called When the Lights Go Out. So we'll be discussing both of these two gems this evening. And we have Chris Riddell as well illustrating for us all throughout. So I'm so thrilled to have everyone here. We're going to go through a little bit. I'm going to ask some questions, but to start off with, I'm going to get them to introduce themselves a little bit and give us a little bit of a reading so you can get a flavour of each of the books. So Caroline, do you want to kick us off, introduce us and give us a little bit of a reading?
Sure. So here's Composite Creatures. And I am going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book, because I think it's one of those books where almost the less you know about it, the better. So this is from chapter 1, not the very beginning of chapter 1, it's a little way in, but here we go. This is Composite Creatures. A long time ago, Mum told me that in her youth, the sky would flock in spring and autumn with migrating starlings, finches, even gulls, huge grey and white beacons of the sea. I've heard recordings of their calls, somewhere between a lighthouse's horn and a baby's wail. I sometimes close my eyes and imagine how it would sound as hundreds of gulls moved across the blue like shot spray, all wailing to each other out of sync. Ghosts that swam the sky. I think it would sound like the end of the world. Over the years, Mum had collected all the fallen feathers she'd found in the garden, on the roof, in the gutter. There was nowhere too low for her to stoop, no mud too deep or sticky for her to squish her knees into and scoop out the treasure. She rinsed the feathers as best she could and balanced them in egg cups wedged between books on shelves. Stuff of stories now, she'd murmur, as she pointed them out to me one after another, telling me which birds they came from. This one a barn owl, this one a crow. But she might as well have been naming dinosaurs. I couldn't picture any of them. All the illustrations in Mum's reference books were completely flat. One time, we were sitting on the garden wall together when a bird landed on a perch above us and made the strangest sound, sort of a low whistle. I'd never seen anything like it with its fat grey form and striped underbelly. But Mum just laughed at it and clasped my face between her hands. Are we supposed to think that's a cuckoo? The little patchwork prints. You can almost hear the clockwork. I felt silly then and didn't look back up at the lie, but I kept listening for a telltale ticking that never came. Perhaps Mum could hear something I couldn't. Still, I continued to stroke Mum's collection of genuine feathers, gliding the silky fronds between my fingers. Something about them always made me want to pull away, but Mum encouraged me to keep going, to know what they felt like. But it was confusing for me. Was the feather still alive without the body it had been attached to? I wanted to stick their sharp shafts into the skin on the back of my hands and wave them in the wind. Be gentle, Nora, she'd whisper. They're fragile, and who knows if we'll find more. I wish I could see inside her head. I could almost feel them, her thoughts, or at least the shape of them. She was my mum. But the things she said, the things she lifted from mysterious drawers, they were from another world. She looked up to the sky for things I couldn't understand, always through her old binoculars, heavy black things, held into shape by stitched skins. She liked to shock me with little facts. Things like, when I was little, the sky was full of diamonds that you could only see at night. And me and your gran used to lie on our backs and watch fluffy clouds go by. You could see shapes in them, and if you asked the sky a question, it sometimes told you the future. The more stories she told, the less I believed her. I would gently push my hands to her belly and say, "You're fibbing. Tell the truth." But Mum would just shake her head so her red curls bounced over her face and promise that it was real. She'd seen it with her own eyes. One night, she even told me that the moon used to be as white as a pearl. At the time, I didn't know what a pearl was, which seemed to make her even sadder. She pulled me to her side and pressed the binoculars to my face. "Keep looking, Nora, up there in the dark. The birds, they might come back. They might." But I don't know if I believed that. The birds had just disappeared. It was their choice. The news reported a muddle of reasons for it over the years: climate change, lack of habitats, a faltering ecosystem, the fact that the earth and sky are turning plastic. I remember when I was little, seeing on TV the reports about initiatives to encourage the building of bird boxes and custom annexes in business premises. Children's TV shows had segments where the host showed you how to build your own bug hotel or bird feeder out of an old pine cone. But it didn't know anyone that managed to bring anything to roost. Later, after I discovered the joy of watching the world through Mum's binoculars, I did ask her when it all started, the fading away of wildlife in the wind and soil. But she just looked out of the window, squinted her eyes against the grey sky and said, "It all happened so gradually. I don't think any of us noticed until they'd gone." And there you go. That's Composite Creatures.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. It was beautiful reading. And Carys, do you want to take us away and read a little bit from your book as well?
I will. Thank you. So this is the opening of When the Lights Go Out. He looks like a prophet as he stands beside the war memorial. Emma comes to a halt across the road, umbrella clutched in one hand, the other supporting a stack of books wrapped in brown paper and string. The books tilt, and she supports the tower with the umbrella pole. He's speaking, but she can't hear him over the sound of the traffic and the Salvation Army band playing carols on the corner of Neville Street. A double-decker stops at the lights, obscuring Emma's view. While the bus waits, she salvages the stub of her previous thought, which was to do with the weather and the music. Snow had fallen, snow on snow. The words of the carol are incongruous. The rain falls and falls, pouring down roofs and hurrying along gutters, skimming windows and diving off sills, collecting in divots and rolling away in search of its level. At first it was inconvenient, then irritating. Now it's intimidating, a reminder of water's powers, of its ability to loosen soil and cut stone, to slip into wall cavities and under the lips of doors. Even when the clouds are wrung out, the air holds wet memories and damp steals into houses, hitching rides on clothes and shoes and in the segments of folded umbrellas. The bus coughs, then it pulls away and she can see him again. A sandwich board stands beside him, covered in a series of exclamations. Record rainfall every winter for years to come. British cities most threatened in Europe for flooding. Sea levels to rise by 1.2 metres. Climate change threatens future of golf. Too much information, Emma decides, and the exclamation marks are misjudged. He gestures right, the thrust of his hand pointing past the arcades and ice cream shops, beyond the carousel and Silcox Funland, over the hump of the Marine Way Bridge and on to the sea. She suspects he is talking about the tide. Last year, the sea occasionally burst over the wall and onto the road, as if it was playing peekaboo. Perhaps he's envisioning a stage beyond games, when the sea lifts its skirts, steps over the wall and tramps along Marine Drive, when empty shells line the road like ears, listening for the next incursion and the next. Emma watches as people pass him. She has no idea whether he usually stands in front of the memorial on a Saturday morning or if this is a one-off. She tries not to use her car where possible, which means she rarely shops in town. If someone stops to take his picture, he doesn't appear to mind, but he must. How could he not? The photograph will probably end up online, where he'll be misunderstood. His clothes are wrong. Safety boots and combat-style trousers and checked shirt might look perfectly reasonable if he was, say, digging a trench or mowing a lawn. And where is his coat? Traffic moves again, and Emma waits a while longer until she's convinced she's seen the worst of it. He's not frightening or accosting anyone. People are ignoring him with the equanimity they afford chuggers, Mormons and big issue vendors. Though it's hard to tell from this distance, she suspects he's shivering. Or maybe he's feverish with purpose, vitalised by an opportunity to alleviate some of his own fear by passing it on to other people. But that is just speculation and can be put to one side in favour of what she knows. He is wet and cold. He is beset and troubled. His name is Chris. and he is her husband.
Oh, you guys are both so good, so atmospheric, which actually is perfect because my first question for both of you is to talk a little bit about this incredible atmosphere that you build, because when I read both of them, they give this slow kind of ratcheting up of layers and pressure and tension and this kind of smokiness of the atmosphere in the background. When you were writing them, how did you kind of create this layers? Did you know going in that you wanted that kind of slow burn of atmosphere? Or was it something that you kind of discovered as you found the story and the characters? Caroline?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to do that. I wanted it to feel creeping and have a kind of drip approach. But I really like books where you have to work it out for yourself. So you're not told anything. You see it happening and you see clues and you have to kind of collect them all in your head and remember things and link things together later. So I like to work a bit for it. So I was hoping other people would as well. But yeah, I think I really enjoy like metaphor as well and symbolism. It makes me sound like such a geek. But I do. So I know, it must be the poet in me that is doing it. I didn't even make that connection myself, Elna, but it's so true. But yeah, I like little cryptic things. So I would tend to, during each draft, I'd be reading it again and I'd see new kind of themes popping up and I'd be trying to fit into every single scene some little things that demonstrate something. So for example, the plants in Nora's house, there's loads of succulents and houseplants that she just can't keep alive no matter what she does. Things like that, and the frog that she finds in the garden. So for me, it was just a really nice way of being really pictorial in what I was doing. But yeah, I don't know about Carys though. What did you do, Carys?
I think it's similar, although there isn't as much to work out in my book because you're sort of in the present following the family, and there aren't the same kind of clues. And that I really enjoyed that about Composite Creatures. Actually, you're right. There is something incredibly satisfying about realizing that you are at the beginning of a puzzle and then trying to work it out. So when we start off with this very odd date, and I'm thinking, something's not normal here. There's something very strange happening here, and immediately you want to carry on reading because you're like, oh, okay, well, are they just both very organized, turning up with a resume each to exchange, like, you know, what's going on?
Yeah, I know. And I
really enjoyed that whole feeling of like, okay, I'm going to have to engage my brain here, and the whole time you're just trying to work things out. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, atmospherically, for me, with When the Lights Go Out, I wanted to write a novel that was set in the winter, and that there'd be a lot of rain and mud, and there was a sort of maybe a bit of a muddy mood to events as well. So that was quite fun.
Well, it was like a symbol then. You fit in some symbols as well. It wasn't just me. I guess one thing though that was in it though, that was kind of like a clue that I was picking up as I was going through was like whether the male protagonist, Chris, how much of what he believes is happening is really happening. I remember trying to read it and trying to work that out. Like how much of it is he exaggerating? How much of it is real? So that was a mystery for me when I was reading it. I remember.
I think that's kind of the uncertainty of that speculative world, because the climate change thing in yours, Carys, especially with the rain constantly slowing down and the anxieties that Chris is kind of beset with, you do feel that kind of, I know it starts to feel a bit like a pressure cooker as this rain is like constantly falling. So I think that is there as well. It's like, how far down this path are we going to follow him?
Yeah, well, he's catastrophizing, so he's almost enjoying it at times, I think. Which is very bad of him, but yeah.
And actually, one of the things as well with both of your books is this kind of central, almost kind of marriage. So the question of the marriage in the books, because it's so vital to both stories. So Composite Creatures, it's Nora's relationship with art, and it's Emma in When Lights Go Out. And we see the world so entirely from their point of view and how they feel in relation to, or, you know, alienation from the other person that they live with, their other half. But as a vehicle, how useful did you find it to have your kind of protagonist in this troubling, slightly uneasy relationship, which I think is fair to say for both of these couples, and have it totally told through kind of basically their point of view, so that the reader has a lot of these doubts as the relationship progresses? How did you build that, Carys? Actually, I really, because it's one of the things that haunted me when I read this last week, that kind of slow realization that your partner is changing and you're not necessarily going along with it.
So I started writing the novel just after the Brexit vote, and then we had those elections around that time as well, and I had a few friends who, in those various votes that we had, voted differently from their partners, and these were like historically happy relationships that were suddenly like in trouble, really, because there was like a really profound disagreement that they hadn't expected, and I was interested in that, and so I sort of took this relationship that has been historically happy in my novel, and you know, they've got a lot of years in the bank, and I wanted to see what would happen if suddenly it became unhappy or difficult or tricky, and I think Emma isn't quite as alone as Nora, because Emma has got that history to fall back on, whereas Nora has, you know, she's sort of on her own because she's lost all these people along the way, her mum and then her Aubrey and Eleanor and Rosa and Luke, and so I feel like she is in some ways she's more vulnerable than Emma. I don't know, what do you think, Caroline?
Yeah, I think she makes herself more vulnerable for sure. I think Emma seemed like a much more stable character than Nora. Nora is cutting herself off from pretty much everything. Plus, I think when it comes to this relationship between her and art, the entire thing is seen from her perspective, whereas in your book, Carys, we see it from both. So we see two sides. But with Nora, all we ever hear about is how she, not even how she sees what's happening, it's what she thinks is happening, or how she thinks about what she sees. So, you know, if she wrote something like, you know, I love art, you've got to think, does she really? Is she saying that to convince us, the person that she's telling the story to? Is she trying to convince herself? So I think that relationship, which from the beginning, I guess, apart from like the odd things like the portfolio and the strange kind of intense dates that they go on, it could be legitimately a seemingly quite normal relationship, but in a slightly strange world. But I wanted that to be kind of one of the mysteries that you're trying to solve as you go through the book, and you pick up the mentions of little things like contracts and the disagreements and things like that, because I thought I'm really into things that seem a bit uncanny, so really familiar, just slightly twisted, because I think that's the bit that kind of gives people bad dreams and that's what I like to do, unfortunately. So yeah, I thought it was a really like important thing to have in this book, because it was a rocky foundation for Nora's next journey. I didn't want it to have anything too good, to be honest. Poor Nora. Yeah.
Well, it is, and I think both of your stories deal with this kind of sense of growing unease and stuff changing around them, and this kind of slow drip of a reveal as stuff moves forward. Caroline, especially you, with the kind of this drip of information about what the situation is. Is this an arranged marriage? What is this kind of mysterious healthcare entity? How bad is the world around them? And one of the things that, you know, I wanted to speak to you about is this, you know, how did you find this kind of world with Nora? Did Nora kind of come to you fully formed as a character, or was it something that you found through the world, or, you know, where was your inspiration for it?
So the story started as a poem. I was asked to write some poems. Yeah, I know, it's a weird story. So I was asked to write some science fiction poems years ago, and I rattled off a bunch of quite quick ones based on things in my living room. And my cat happened to walk in, and she inspired this story, which probably will make no sense to you unless you've read the book, why my cat might have inspired it. But so I started kind of basing it around that character that I'd made up. And I knew I wanted to write it in first person because it was really important to me to try and write something where I don't want to say there's an unreliable narrator, but there's a narrator that you question and you wonder why she's actually telling her story anyway. So I knew that. And then once I started to draft it, I think initially Nora was a bit more proactive. She was a bit more engaged with the things that she gets involved with through the story. And then I finished it, and I remember the ending, which was completely the opposite of the ending that happens in the book now, just seemed not right. And I was really wanting the book to, even though it's a dystopia, it can fit into lots of genres. I wanted it to be quite realistic, since I'd based a lot of the environmental stuff on real things that are happening. So I wanted what Nora did to be quite realistic. And like most people, she's a morally grey character, and she's presented with options and choices to make, which seemingly are, well, they're quite awful in lots of ways. So I wanted it at least to represent what I think most people would do in that situation, hence the change of ending. Yeah. But yeah, so you might say I've got a more pessimistic view of people once people have read it, but I thought it was the more realistic way to go. I also didn't want Nora to be too proactive in the sense of her questioning everything. I wanted her to sort of be going along with it as we, the reader, are as well, because she is a normal person. She doesn't know all of the scientific genetic stuff that the story gets involved with. She doesn't understand that. She's not a scientist. She's just an everyday person. So she's definitely not based on me. Definitely not, because I've been asked that one before. But she's just generally a normal person. Tried to keep her as real as possible. Yeah.
And for you, Carys, I mean, Emma as well, reading it, you can see this kind of frustration as these kind of anxieties start to take over her life and her marriage. And it's a very kind of, she feels quite isolated as well, in the same way that Nora kind of cuts herself off from her friends and family and isolates herself. You really get this feeling that Emma is in this kind of family bubble, and there's not much, to go outside, and she's a little bit alone in it. And how did you find kind of Emma as the character? How did you build her? Was she inspired by anything? What made you think of this kind of marriage that is having to watch itself go through? I mean, you spoke a little bit about the voting, but was that just the inspiration? In fact, did you write this during a rainstorm? What? Tell us a bit.
Well, I noticed a few years ago that during the winters, my children all played football, and they still do, or they referee at the weekends to earn money. And I noticed that in the winter, there would often be, or there started to be, a period of time where they can't play because the pitches become unplayable because it rains so much. And I don't know whether that's just something that I've started to notice, or whether we are, genuinely having much wetter winters, where specifically where I live. I know we are in general, and so I wanted to set the novel sort of in that time where it's just raining and raining and raining. And I gave Chris the job of being a gardener, because I thought that would be a pretty miserable job to have if it was raining all the time. So there's this sort of that physical aspect of his misery, and then he's got all these sort of clouds in his head as well of just worry. And I suppose what Emma's doing is she's trying to hold on, because she thinks that if she can just wait it out, maybe it will pass, like this sort of period of rain that we get in the winter, and maybe things will improve. A bit like, when one of your children's perhaps being awkward or difficult, and you just think, well, maybe they'll grow out of it, or maybe if I leave it a little bit longer, and so she's having to sort of do that and bite her tongue a lot, and and eventually there comes a point in the book where she decides, actually, there's the line and you've just crossed it, and that's the end of that. But we sort of spend a lot of the book sort of tentatively approaching that line in a sort of, what's the time, Mr. Wolf sort of way, I suppose, where you're just waiting for her to turn around and pounce, and eventually she does.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very kind of like rich world to read, and these characters were so kind of gorgeously built up. And I think one of the other things that you hit upon is this idea about the children being present, because I think motherhood and being a mother is a theme in both of these books. So you see Nora struggle with the concept of motherhood and miss her mother throughout, and Carys, you can see Emma's like obvious love for her children. And also I think the other really lovely thing is we occasionally get to see things kind of through the children's perspective in your book, and they just felt so kind of real and fleshed out, and absolutely like kids that and chat to, who are in your family. But how did you think about motherhood when you were looking at it, when you were writing about this, Caroline, this kind of idea of like missing your mother? Did you know that was going to be so central to the idea of Nora?
In a sense, yes, because she's missed out on something since her mum died that she's never been quite able to replace. And in lots of ways, she's quite naive, she's quite vulnerable, she's quite innocent. And she is out there seeking almost a mother replacement. And so she's looking wherever she can for it. So in some cases, some people find it through work, managers, anything like that, friends. And Nora's looking for it and finds temporarily at work, where she just throws herself into it. But then also there's a big organization called Eastern Grove, who are quite central in the book, and who she and her fiance Art are members of. And they almost become, in her eyes, a parent replacement too. She sees the doctors and people as loving her and caring for her. And there's no baddies there. And in lots of ways they are doing that. But it's how far she's willing to do what they say when they offer her even just the slightest bit of comfort. And then at the other end of the scale, we've got her relationship with the creature that she is handed about a quarter of the way through the book. And I did want to kind of explore a little bit of nature versus nurture with that creature as well, and the way it changes and starts to act around Nora, who is caring for it. I can't say too much about it though. I feel like whenever it comes to Nut, I have to keep quiet. People have to just discover it. It's like I want to say so much, but I just can't. But yeah, so there's two ends of it. There's her as mother and her searching for motherhood as well. Yeah.
And Carys, how about for you, for motherhood as a theme in your book?
I thought that giving Emma a couple of children sort of, it means that she can't just think about herself in the situation in which she finds herself. She has to think about them as well. And she has to, I mean, in the novel, they're getting ready for Christmas. And I don't know about you, but in my family, it's funny because if you try and change anything about the way you've done Christmas, and my children are in their late teens and early 20s now, and if you try and change anything or do anything differently because you think, well, nobody minds anymore, or we don't need to do that bit of Christmas anymore because it's a lot of work, or it's like suddenly greeted by all these protests and like these sort of howls of indignance, like, no, we've always done it like this. In fact, the other year I changed, we decorated the room, and so I made the Christmas tree. I got some different decorations for it that were blue because it matched the room, and one of my children was really upset. It was just really funny because I hadn't even, because they wanted to put the normal decorations up, and so in the novel, Emma is just trying to hold everything together, trying to make everything normal, and that's quite hard because it's not a normal Christmas, and Chris's mother has also invited herself to come and stay with them as well. So things are just sort of building up, and I was struck actually by the similarities in our novels. Even though there's no sort of speculative element to mine, we have this incident with a frog in both of our novels, which was really interesting, and we sort of build up to a horrific party in both novels as well, and I love a party that goes horribly wrong, and both novels have a party that goes horribly wrong in them as well.
Yes, yours terribly.
Very wrong. Goes very wrong.
Very wrong. Yeah.
Have either of you ever hosted a disastrous dinner party out of interest?
Well,
not on that scale.
No, maybe not on Carys' scale by any means. But mind you, like, I don't know what the guests have thought before. Maybe they thought it was disastrous. I don't know. I don't think
you're gonna have to survey them in future.
I will. I'll check after this just in case. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've got one more question before we're going to move on to kind of a little bit more of the audience Q&A. And really, my question is, because I think it would be a really helpful thing for people listening who perhaps like haven't read that much. So without giving too much away, would you be able to tell us a little bit about kind of what your book is about and what you kind of are hoping that readers will take from it? So, Carys, just like a kind of like a little nut, as it were, kernel for people to take away. I'm sorry.
So When the Lights Go Out is a novel. It's about coming to terms with our changing environment, and it's also about the changing climate of a marriage. It's about the effects of austerity on a small northern town. It's about what happens when your mother-in-law invites herself for Christmas, and it's about what it might mean to try and live happily ever after.
Gorgeous. That was a great pitch. And Caroline, for you.
Mine is about a lot of things. So mine is about motherhood. It's also about the way, the direction the world might go in if we head in a certain way with plastics. But it's also about the kind of choices that we make as people when we're presented with amoral choices, and the value of life as well. So what would you be willing to sacrifice if you could live a little bit longer? And if you can live a little bit longer, does that equate in a worthy life? Or should you just make the best of what you've got? So yeah, there's quite a lot in there.
Right, now we've got a couple of questions from the audience, which is lovely. So the first question is from Russell, which is, presumably you're both writing, editing during the pandemic. How did you find that environment affected your process? So Caroline, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so at first, I found it really hard to do anything. So if we're thinking about March, when it all began, when lockdown began, I remember just thinking, I can't think creatively at all. I really struggled. I just spent most of the time just, staring at my own knee. I was just like, what's going on? The world's too crazy. But then as time went on, and the sort of weeks rolled into months, I think it became a bit of a haven for me. So it was a bit of an escape. It was something to keep me going. It was somewhere to go for lack of travel and actually seeing people. I could lose myself in that. And in terms of editing as well, it kind of helped a little bit to be inside my own head. Plus, obviously, I worked with some really good editors as well, who, because everyone was housebound, were always available. So that was really helpful too. So I would find that it was a struggle at the beginning, but as time went on, I sort of got used to it and tried to make the best of it. I kind of felt like I wanted to come out of the whole 2020 thing, and even before, with like something that I could be proud of and use that time as best I could. But I don't know about you. What about you, Carys?
Do you know what? My novel was finished before the pandemic and was supposed to come out in May last year.
Horrible timing.
Yeah, it was terrible timing. So they postponed the hardback release and just brought it out as an audiobook and as an ebook. And they said, we'll bring it out in August. So that was fine. But then August came and they thought, actually, it's not really an August book. So let's postpone it to November. And then about 10 days or so before it was supposed to come out in November, all the bookshops closed again. I don't know whether, I can't remember which lockdown, whether that was our local, because I'm in the Liverpool City region, so we were catapulted into the tier system, or whether that was everybody. But anyway, the bookshops were closed and my novel came out, and they've been closed ever since. So yeah, that was my pandemic. Well, they're open now though. So
it's such a shame, like, it is the most beautiful, and it has these incredible, I'm actually going to show them off, these incredible end papers. Look at
saw
that.
those.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to show it off for you. Because it is so beautiful, and Caroline's is amazing as well, because it's got this like lovely kind of like metal gold to it, as well as like a very weird illustration. Because the book's quite weird. I don't know if you guys picked up on that.
I can't help it. Can't help it.
We actually have a kind of competition winner who is coming in to ask a question. So that's Dave. So Sam, if you let him into the room so he can ask away. Dave, take it away.
Hi everyone.
Hi Dave.
Hi Dave.
Caroline, I wanted to ask if you, when you sit down to write, are you actively looking to disturb your audience, or is there some other reason why you're drawn to sort of the weird, darker stories?
I think I am wanting to disturb people. Yes. I don't know if I always will with everything, but yeah, I think I was trying to do that. And yeah, with the next one that I'm writing as well, I'm trying to do that again. So I do like that. I think I like the idea of somebody finishing the book and then it's staying with them. I'm not going to say haunting them, for want of a better word, but I like the fact that I've kind of stuck in there a little bit, and I've kind of made them think and made them feel something as well. So actually, yes, Dave, I did want to disturb people.
I think she was actually thrilled when I told her that I had a bad dream about teeth after I'd edited it. I think that was actually a very high compliment. So
yeah, if I'm in your dreams, that's an achievement. Yeah. So yes, I did.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. It was great to see your
Thank
face, and thank you for asking a great question. Great. So our next question is from Lucy, which is for Caroline, and it's a little bit more about horror. So it's a bit about, is horror a genre that you're well steeped in? So do you read a lot in the kind of horror area, or?
No, is the answer. I did when I was younger. I read a lot of horror. It started with like point horrors when I was a kid, and went on to like Stephen King. But I don't read so much now. Sometimes I'll pick something up and it does have horror undertones, but I don't tend to go for horror. And I can't even watch horror films in the house because my husband is really scared of scary films and won't tolerate them in any sense. So no, we've got quite a scare-free house, and so maybe this is me having to channel it. I'm just trying to make my own scares. I don't know, but I did used to love it as a kid. I used to love scary stuff, and I think I'm more into kind of supernatural horror normally, though this is more, I would say, if this has horror undertones, Composite Creatures, it's a bit more kind of body horror, I think, which is something I don't know tons about. It just ended up that way. Just channeled it organically is the answer to that one.
You do a really good job of it, though. I mean, I can think of two things, like just straight away, of two images. There's one early on in the novel where somebody's chin is jutting out like the tip of a sword. That completely stayed with me. And then there's a moment where where the hands are described as like bony waterfalls.
Oh God.
And yeah, there are just like some really interesting bodily descriptions in the novel that really stood out. And I think you can tell that you're a poet.
I think
because the imagery is really strong.
I think a lot of the poems that I write in the two collections that I have are often quite dark in themselves. So they're often quite like supernatural, based on something historical, or something quite speculative, or they're a bit horror tinged actually sometimes as well. So I think I probably carried that on through. But yeah, funnily enough, I just don't read a lot of it, and I'm not allowed to watch any. So have to make my own scares.
And I've got a question from Laura here for you, Carys, which is, what's changed about your writing process from the first book to your most recent novel? And what do you still find yourself surprised by as a bit more of a veteran writer?
So do you know what? I think I found myself surprised by the fact that each book is its own puzzle. And so when I started my second novel, I actually really stupidly thought, oh, this will be easy because I've done it before. And it actually, the really useful thing was knowing that I could carry on, that I had the stamina to get from the beginning to the end. But actually, it was its own it had its own difficulties that were different from my first novel. And so, yeah, I suppose each book is hard in its own way. But having done one, you think, well, I can probably make it to the end of another one. But that might actually be the only bit of useful experience that I can take with me from one book to the next. So maybe I'm doing it wrong.
I don't think there is doing it wrong.
No, I was going to say, do you have one of the books that you've written that you found harder than the others, or the easiest?
Oh, that's a good question. When the Lights Go Out was hard. It took me a long time because I'd had my brother died while I was writing it, and that just made it hard. I think it was hard it's hard to exist in your head when your head is not a nice place to be. And so I found myself, and we moved house, so I found myself doing things like stripping wallpaper off ceilings, or like going and digging a giant vegetable bed, or just finding jobs to do that meant I didn't have to be sat by myself in my office in my own brain. So that was probably the hardest one, just because of other things that were happening. And then I'm writing one now that I started writing in the lockdown. So that's had its own challenges, I think. But yeah. How have you found writing in the lockdown?
I would say up and down. So it's got a lot easier. I think by the end of last year, I was thinking, actually, I've got more time because no commuting, nothing like that. So it actually gave me more energy. I didn't realize how tired I was before. So yeah, I could spend a lot of the evening doing it. But yeah, so I was writing last year. Most of my writing time was writing my new novel, which it's funny when you said, each novel has its own challenges. It doesn't necessarily get easier. It definitely doesn't, because I suppose with each novel you're trying to do something new. So it's just like a new experiment all over again. You can do it. You can write something of that length and you can get to the end of an editing process, but you're trying to do something different. So it is going to be difficult. So yeah, I related to that a lot. A lot.
And we've actually got, I wanted to ask a question prompted by one of Chris's drawings, actually, of the frog, which is, can you tell us a little bit about the frogs in your respective books?
Yeah, I was really overawed when I saw there was a frog in Carys as well, because I felt like the role of the frog was also sort of similar. So in mine, it's something that the protagonist Nora comes across when she's trying to make the garden somewhere welcoming for herself. So she's trying to carve out a piece of the world just for her, not with Arthur in, just for her. And she finds this frog nestled in amongst the leaves and things. And because this is a world where wildlife is disappearing, she doesn't know what to do with it. It's a big shock. And it's also, for her, it's a massive responsibility, because normally if something's found, it's usually dead or half dead, and then it gets carted off to some sort of vet or museum, and then that's the last anyone sees of it. But she finds this thing, and it's almost like, what do I do with it? Like, can I even cope with knowing that this thing is in my garden? Should I be doing something? And it's how she kind of copes with that responsibility. It's a very small part of the book. It's only like one chapter, but it's the effect that it has on her, and it kind of mirrors the way she deals with a lot of responsibilities, in that she just tries to forget it, and tries to find an easy way out as well. So that was the role of my particular frog. What about yours, Carys? Yours had a kind of awful end. Like, I remember going, oh, when I read it. It was, oh, I didn't like it.
So yeah, Emma's in the garden doing something quite similar. Like, she's tidying up, doing something that I think Chris normally does, but he hasn't done it because he's not doing any of the things he should be doing. And she accidentally harms a frog whilst she's tidying up, and then has to follow through and be cruel to be kind, and finish the job. And it shows that she's quite squeamish, which it's sort of, there's an echo of that later in the novel with a different animal, and the sort of final straw that breaks the camel's back between her and Chris. So yeah, it's sort of quite similar. They're both outside looking at this frog, and yeah, it was just funny.
The way that you described what she does with the frog, I remember thinking that was almost quite horror for me. It was so deadpan the way you described it. She just I don't even want to say it. If people are going to read it, I won't say what happens to it. But yeah, it just made me go, oh, it just made my stomach clench. It was awful.
It's the one thing in my novel that's actually real. I took it. I did that in real life.
What a reveal!
Yeah, I did not expect that. That's terrible. Was it
even
going?
Yeah. Yes.
Just wondering.
Yeah, I went back in the house, and my kids were just like, "Well, you can't leave it out there like that, Mum." And I was like, "No, you're right. I can't." So,
I suppose it's quick.
Yeah.
Quick.
Moving on from frog death. I've got one more question to ask from another competition winner whose name is Daphne. I'm going to ask on her behalf. So it's, where do you both find inspiration for your work, whether it's for poetry, short stories, novels, etc.? Do you have to go searching for it, or are you constantly finding yourself filled with ideas?
I mean, I get lots of ideas, but not all of them are good. I think 1 in 20 has got any like depth to it at all. I think I'm mostly in terms of tone and language, I am inspired by poetry, not necessarily reading it so much, but writing it. So I like kind of lyrical sentences and words that just sound really good together, and I really get off on that. But in terms of storylines, I'm more inspired by film, actually, because I tend to think very visually, and when I'm writing it, and actually when I'm reading a book, I tend to visualize it like a film, even with dodgy camera angles and zooming in on things. I just can't help it. So whenever I see like a really good film that's directed really, really well, that stays with me a little bit, and it has a feeling that sometimes I want to emulate in something else, which is kind of why I often write in first person, because it's a bit like being an actor. I think it's like embodying a part, and I'm describing it as I see it, like it was a film. So yeah, a lot of things, but mainly films. Yeah.
And Carys, how about for you?
I think when it comes to novels, it tends to be that it's something that I've been thinking about that's either been interesting me or bothering me in some way, and then I end up writing a novel about it as a sort of way of saying, oh, maybe you've been thinking about this, and maybe this has been bothering you too, and here are some jokes, maybe you'll like them. That's sort of how my novels work. I think with short stories, it's a little bit more like just throwaway comments. I can remember one of my children once, when we were shopping, got onto there was a space on one of the shelves, and he was about 3, and he climbed onto the shelf where the bread should have been and sort of sat there like this. And then as I walked past with the trolley with his sister in the baby bit, he went, buy me. And I was like, how much are you? And he was like, 50p. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I wrote, there's a short story in my short story collection called The Baby Aisle, where people buy babies in the baby aisle, you know. And so, yeah, with short stories, I think you can just have so much fun, like with just funny throwaway ideas, the kind of things that you could never put in a novel because it, you know, it wouldn't work. But
yeah, it's like a little snapshot of something. It's a bit the same with writing a poem, to be honest. That's why when I was writing the poems that initially this novel turned into, they were all snapshots, but I just remember thinking this one could actually have a bit more of a story to it, and that was how I ended up writing the novel. But I just had to say that.
I think we're going to end on a question which is actually about your covers, which is your books both have such beautiful covers. Did you have much input in how they turned out, and did they match your vision for the books, or were they a surprise in a way? Actually, whilst I'm doing this, we're going to get rid of my face and I'm just going to hold these up whilst you guys talk. So,
well, I know with mine, yes, I had lots of say. It was loads of fun. So I think initially we set up like a shared Pinterest board, I think, Anna, and we
love a Pinterest.
Yes, I love Pinterest too. It's just amazing. So we all just pinned, especially me, like book covers that we thought fit with the theme. And luckily we were kind of along the same lines in that we wanted something illustrative and a bit sketchy. And then the publisher, Angry Robot, just kind of took that away, did a bit of their own research, put some concepts together, and found some artists which had really unique styles which might work with the novel. And then they got sent to me. I had a look at them. We picked this one, which is Rohan Eason, he's called. There he is. And then we picked something from the novel, which is not just one scene. It becomes quite an important setting in the novel as the cover, but it's still quite mysterious. And then he just captured it perfectly, and that was how our cover was made. It was quite seamless, I thought. It
was very smooth, actually. It's very good. And how about for you, Carys? Because yours is beautiful. I mean, obviously the end papers are amazing, but this is also gorgeous.
So I just that was the cover that they gave my novel, and I was very pleased with it. But then after they had given it to me, like, here's your cover, do you like it? And I said, oh yes, it's beautiful. There was a piece on the Penguin blog of covers that they had been working on in the lead up to it, and I got to see like maybe 4 or 5 different covers before they came up with the final one. So that was really interesting to see, where they'd started and then where they'd ended up.
Also love the bunnies on the back cover,
which become very important.
Big fan.
Big
fan of those.
No, they're lovely.
Yeah, because they're both just beautiful books. And honestly, I can't recommend picking them up enough, especially now bookshops are back open. But if you can't attend a bookshop, do get yourself a copy in the post. If you're buying Composite Creatures, if you message us, we'll make sure you get an ebook as well if you buy it from an indie bookshop. So all you have to do is drop us an email and send us a receipt, and we'll send you over an ebook too. And Carys and I are right in thinking, so it's out in hardback now, but it's not in paperback until November.
Eleanor, can I just interject and just do a little resume of this fascinating talk, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, but have been disturbed by, I've got to say.
Sorry about the frogs.
Like Dave, I think you're both disturbed.
Thanks, Chris.
This is a suggestion, Carys, for your next book.
Thank you.
Which could go down well. And again, we seem to be on a frog theme. And this connection you have with your readers. We must have all murdered frogs in our time. It's Miss Piggy I feel sorry for. But actually, Caroline, I enjoy your inspiration. So I'm just picturing you with Noah sort of after a feed, catching up on Netflix, thinking,
yes,
great idea. I can write a really horrific Regency novel. It could be fantastic.
Totally, yes, I can do that.
And the other thing I wanted to say, Caroline, is both congratulations, but how on earth did you manage to write a novel and do all the things you do whilst having Noah?
I don't know. I just did it really. I was very tired. I was very tired.
I didn't like to say anything, Caroline. I mean, we can all see just how tired you're looking there. I mean, I think we can agree.
Terrible.
Thank you.
I want to know about the frogs. I'm so glad. And here is Noah with, I think, a very, very beautifully knitted rabbit, which looks a bit like a genetic experiment. It's gone just slightly wrong.
Yeah. It almost looks like it has a human ear on the side of it a little bit.
Yep. I did see your Instagram post with your knitted rabbit.
Yeah, I did do that.
And Carys, I love procrastination is a fantastic one. I would say next time the lights go out, do change the light bulb. That's the go-to one. And I thought just Bony Waterfalls is a great name for a band. And Dave's question, are you disturbed? I think we covered that pretty much.
Yeah, we've answered that question.
And I think actually, Carys, book launches are probably better in lockdown, aren't they? We can actually ensure the quality of the wine. You're in lockdown, and I felt your pain with teenagers. I'm post-teenage now, in terms of my children. They've gone to that sort of unimpressed adult phase, which you will experience.
Excellent.
They're not impressed by anything. But really, what were you thinking about? Blue Christmas decorations. And just a few little sort of drawings based on as you were talking about your respective novels, which I thought you did absolutely beautifully, with the two sort of main protagonists.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And the slow burn of atmosphere, which Eleanor, I think you started with, which again is a wonderful sort of name for a novel, I would say, or a cookbook. I'm not sure which.
I'll think about that.
And lastly, some illustrations to the wonderful readings you gave.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Oh, they're great.
They're incredible.
Those are amazing.
Thank you.
So lucky to have Chris join us to do all these, and also to, it's good to have it in pictorial form so we can really imagine that frog getting killed. To really ram at home.
Yeah. Yep. That's the lasting image everyone is going to have now. What the hell happened to this frog?
I'm so sorry.
Do not apologize to me. I love stories like that. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, do please go and check out both of these incredible books. And thanks again to Chris for live illustrating this launch. It has been incredible. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. And yeah, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.